Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're going to give it just a moment while people are joining the webinar. All right, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Kentucky Harm Reduction and Recovery Community of Practice webinar series presented by Voices of Hope and the University of Kentucky Perinatal Research and Wellness Center. My name is Brooke West. I'm a person in recovery and the training coordinator at Voices of Hope in Lexington, Kentucky. The goal of a community of practice is to bring together a group to engage in training, share best practices, and network around a common interest. Today, the topic of our community of practice is Advocating for Recovery, a framework for peer support specialists, presented by Tara Hyde, CEO of PAR, People Advocating Recovery. Tara Mosley Hyde holds a dual master's degree from American University School of Public Health, specializing in public administration and public policy, and a bachelor's degree in public policy and pre-law from the University of Louisville. Her passion for public policy and research was ignited during an internship with the Legislative Research Commission on the Health and Welfare Committee. A person in long-term recovery since 2011, Tara became the Chief Executive Officer of People Advocating Recovery in 2022. In addition to her role at PAR, Tara is the Vice President of the Advisory Board for the Kentucky Recovery Housing Network, supporting the regulation of recovery residences in Kentucky. She also serves on the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment National Advisory Council at SAMHSA. Tara has contributed significantly to developing policies that facilitate the successful workforce re-entry of individuals with substance use disorders. Her work spans designing supportive recovery spaces on university campuses, community-based systems of care, and creating standards for recovery peer support services in collaboration with SAMHSA and the Department of Corrections. So before I hand it over to Tara, just a few housekeeping things. If you are a peer support specialist interested in continuing education credit for this webinar, you will need to complete the survey that we will place in the chat toward the end of this session. There will also be a link to a survey for Tara's presentation. So there will be two links in the chat at the end of the session. One for the continuing education certificate and one survey for people advocating recovery. So we have the chat feature on today, so you're able to participate during the webinar. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and Tara will answer questions at the end. So we are so excited to have this presentation today about advocacy and language. And thank you so much, Tara, for being here. I will turn it over to you.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for being here. I am super, super excited for today. And I know, or at least I hope that a lot of you guys are knowledgeable and excited for this week. There's a really exciting event that's happening tomorrow, if you are not aware, that we're planning for and have been planning for a few weeks. So Recovery Advocacy Day for my organization is tomorrow. So we've been really excited for that. So this just kind of worked out really nicely to work together with Voices of Hope and with you guys, and for us to be here together today. And with that, I will go ahead and share my screen. So just give me 1 second as we get the tech going. All right. There we go. All right. So what we'll talk about today, and I'll introduce myself and we'll talk a little bit about language. I will be kind of looking at the chat and interacting with you guys, and I will take questions at the end, only because I want to get through the content. Sometimes we'll have some folks ask questions and we'll kind of get through those questions through the content. So I'd like to kind of just wait till the end to get to those questions. just because we might actually answer them as we go through. So yeah, some things that I'd like to cover though initially is just how exciting it is to talk about advocacy and to talk about language and how to talk especially about recovery. So what we'll talk about today is language and just some of those basic one-on-one basic introductory level. How do we talk about recovery and using appropriate language, especially in the general public and very public settings. So this is not language that you would use, you know, in your pathways of recovery, in your safe spaces, in your groups, and in those, you know, clinical settings or anything like that. We're talking about at the grocery store. We're talking about down the street with your neighbors. We're talking about at Halloween parties, right? Like we're talking about in those very public settings. How we talk about recovery is important, and how we talk about substance use and substance use disorder is important. And so we'll talk about how we talk about recovery and with stakeholders in a variety of different ways, right? We're talking about with the media, we're talking about business owners, we're talking about legislators, and legislators not just at the state level, but also at the local level, right? Because it's important to engage local, state, and federal. And then we'll talk about advocacy one-on-one. So I know a lot of folks here today, you may be peers, you may be family, you may be allies and professionals who are just individuals who are supportive of folks who are in recovery. That's a beautiful thing. You have a voice, you have a say. I'm so glad you're here. You are just as important and as valid and should be present and speak out about recovery too. And we're going to tell you and help to support you with that language as well. So language 101. So using language that centers around recovery that will help to elevate the message. And we talked a little bit about this a minute ago. So it will assist with sharing individual stories who are making a change in their life or who is seeking a change without causing them to jeopardize their futures, right? So this is really important when we talk about sharing our stories in a public setting. It's really important that we talk and when we share our story is that we share our story of resilience. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk about sharing our stories of recovery and not sharing our story of trauma. So, and I really want us to focus on that, sharing our story of resilience, not our story of trauma. Again, keeping our minds focused on the general community, not talking about our stories of trauma with our neighbors, with people in the general community. We are the people that are really carrying the message of recovery. For most people who are in the general community, the only interaction that they have or knowledge that they have around recovery is us or the media. That's the only way that they're getting information around substance use disorder or a meme on social media. That's it. So unless they're getting other information or unless they're exposed to other information, they're not going to conferences. They're not going to this training, right? Like we are it. So unless we are representing ourselves and we're representing recovery as a public health issue and are really talking about what substance use disorder really looks like, that's all of the information that they're getting. And it's up to us to really talk about and define what that looks like. So using language that showcases what substance use disorder is as a public health crisis and not as a moral failing emphasizes the need for that public policy change. And we, again, are the ones, and I say we as in like, I am a person who's in long-term recovery. So for me, I take it as my personal responsibility to do that because I am a person who knows and recognizes that policy needs to change because barriers were placed in front of me as a person who could not access resources, support, and care because substance use disorder is recognized as a moral failing and not as a public health crisis. Bottom line. So what's the problem as we just recognized it? We need more opportunities for people to achieve long-term recovery. We need effective treatment and recovery support services. And we know there are discriminatory policies and public and policymakers don't know the reality of recovery. And why is that? We need a strong national recovery movement around individuals who are in recovery. And we have to put a person's face and voice on recovery to break down those misperceptions and change those attitudes. Like I said, the only thing and the only information that people are generally exposed to are the worst stories, the worst categorizations of ourselves. And usually that's because of some really, really sad instances. And that's just an unfortunate sort of symptom and circumstance. But we have to show the positive, and it's really up to us. It truly is. Advocating for policy changes, and that's how we change that discrimination, because we can be the change. And I truly mean that, and I truly believe that we can and are the change. So I would love if some folks would love to participate in the chat. What do you believe or think? Do you believe or think that the term abuse is problematic? Like, what do you think of when you hear the term abuse? I'm just gonna pop that guy open so I can monitor here. Ah. Violence, absolutely. Someone's harming themselves, domestic, absolutely. Harm, absolutely. I love it. It's firing up. Harming, negative. So absolutely. Also, and I'm going to plant this seed, abuse. And I really want you to take a step back, right? Like outside of substance use, outside of, recovery, substance use, abuse also implies morality, right? It also implies like there's a choice, right? So when you abuse something, it's a choice, right? So when we talk about that, it removes the factor of public health. It removes the factor of a substance use disorder. So when we're talking about phrasing and helping people to understand what substance use disorder is, right? And we're trying to define what that is and trying to help people to understand that it is a public health issue that has there are lots of opportunities for treatment modalities, and it needs long-term support systems, and we need to change public policy to support this effort. When we are talking about that and we're using terms that identify it as a moral problem like abuse, right, it sends the wrong message, right? Like we're using the wrong terms and phrases that send the wrong message. And so it's really confusing for people that are in the general community because they don't understand. Right. So that's why we need to start using language that is unified. And we're all using the same language that is a public health issue, and using that same language uniformly across all of our platforms and across all of our narratives. We have to start using all of that language together. We have to. So again, a lot of you guys spoke about, the violent nature of abuse, talking about it, relates to negativity, to stigma, right? Even outside of all of that, right? Thinking about how we are going to characterize substance use disorder as a public health issue as it is. We have to start using terms that identify it as such, which is saying what it is. It is a substance use disorder. So we have to start using terms that identify it as such. Oh, oops. Oh, went too far and then I went back too far. Multiple pathways of recovery. So when you hear that phrase, what do you think of? Go ahead and drop it in the chat and I'll start shouting out some stuff. Inclusive, freedom, it's not linear. I love that. Choices, love it, absolutely. So multiple pathways, AA, NACR, not cookie cutter, absolutely. NAAA, faith-based, recovery that's not linear, MARA, absolutely. Also, something that I love to say is that multiple pathways of recovery also means that you don't even have to choose one, right? That you can have a variety for one individual, right? You can utilize more than just one pathway. And something that I also like to talk about is that you don't have to use just one pathway of recovery, but also that recovery is just a component and a piece of your like holistic health, right? So when I talk about my recovery is just one piece of like my whole life. My whole life is made up of all of these different types of communities and my wellness. Oh, I love that, Stephanie. Thank you so much. I saw you put in wellness, recovery pathways includes any positive change towards wellness. I love all of that. So for me, and I'll share a little bit about myself. Something that I love to do is I love playing volleyball. So I am a part of a sand volleyball community. So that is like a huge piece of like my wellness pathway where we get together, we have fun, we play in tournaments. So that's a piece of my wellness pathways, but I stay active. My daughter, and I make sure that my daughter is associated very well into my community, right? And we're a part of that group. I'm also a huge nerd, so I'm a part of a lot of different like research stuff, as you guys heard earlier when Brooke introduced me, which, like all of that stuff is amazing, but that just means that I love to be of service, right? Like I love to be involved in service. That is a huge piece of a part of me. And so, like that is a part of my pathway too, because that is me giving to my community. So all of those pieces make up who I am. And those are all things that help contribute to my recovery because it's me being connected in some way to my community. Those are all parts, right? So that is all of those beautiful parts of recovery. And we can't just like identify only recovery being these one little pieces, right? We have to identify it as the whole health and wellness. Redefining relapse. So when you hear the term relapse, what are your thoughts? Go ahead and drop some thoughts in the chat. Failure, return to use, intentional, going back to negative behaviors, return to use again. Absolutely. Guilt and shame, return to use, a step back. Weak, reoccurrence, remorse. Moral shortcoming, absolutely. So, and then, again, right, like I want to make sure that we are framing our mind, right, specifically around these terms and specifically around this training, right? Like this training is about how we talk in public with the general community. And also, I mean, like for me personally, like I've really taken this language and this is how I talk all the time. And I mean, I talk to pretty much everybody like this now. I've been using language of recovery for, I don't know, probably 12 years. I've been a person in long-term recovery for coming up on 14. I'm in lucky number 13 right now. But when Mike Berry, who was my first trainer, taught me the language of recovery, it was like an eye-opening moment for me because it gave me an opportunity to see that like I didn't have to live in like this space of constantly revisiting my trauma. It gave me an opportunity to see that I could use my story as a way to overcome challenges, right? And so, and that's really where we should be focusing our stories, our storytelling. We need to start utilizing our stories to share our stories of resilience. And so when we think about relapse and when we think about some of these terms and words, again, right, like we need to reframe our mind and help us to see that like the terminology relapse and abuse is associating with this old way of thinking that it is a moral failing when it isn't. And also, as another side note to that, is that the people in the community and the general public, we're giving them the wrong message. We're telling them that it is a moral failing when we use these terms. And we have to start using terms that model that it is a public health issue. So when we say things like someone had a reoccurrence of use, or if you don't feel comfortable saying things like that, you could say something as simple as someone had a use event, someone used, being as very simple as possible and describing what happened rather than using terms that have had a derogatory nature and have been used and weaponized in the past, right? Because relapse has been weaponized in the past. And we just don't want to do that anymore, right? Like we want to use terms that instead define what happened or are more from a public health lens. So defining what happened, that person has used, period. Or something that I've recently heard too is a disruption in recovery. And I really like that. That's been my new phrase that I've chosen to use, especially when I've been drafting any new research articles and white papers, just because I think that really characterizes it nicely in a way that allows for individuals to see that they don't have to surrender any of their experience, if they had a reoccurrence after 8 years, have a reoccurrence, that doesn't mean that they then surrender those 8 years, right? That just means they had a reoccurrence and tomorrow they can start, fresh. And here we are, right? Like let's continue to build our life, right? And they had a disruption and then let's keep moving. So thinking about how you can frame your mind in a way that helps people to build that resilience and empower, and thinking about that. I like that. I always ask people, how long have they been working on wellness? I like that. And keeping them engaged, right? Like that's what we want to do. We want to keep people engaged. What is recovery? This will be a great one. Go ahead and drop some ideas in the chat. I love these ideas, and I love that everybody's bouncing off of each other. Holistic health, a means to better one's life. Absolutely. Freedom, restoration, process of change, positive steps, steps of progress. Absolutely. A way of life, definitely. Having hope, actively working towards health and wellness, definitely. All of these things, all of these things. So the only thing that recovery is not is something that's in this itty bitty box, in your little Zoom box. So anything that's in the Zoom box, we do not want to exclude things. Anything that's outside the quality of health and wellness. So the problem is that sometimes we get so narrowly focused on recovery is that we forget that we then can exclude people. And we don't want to do that. We want to keep our minds open and keep people invited, right? And we want to include people. And I love that idea and that concept of wellness, right? And it's about bringing people in, right? We want to empower people and keep people coming back and help to people to rise up. So continue on that mind path and that thought path and whatever that looks like to you. And also, recovery looks different for every individual. So for my recovery is not going to be the same as your recovery. And that's beautiful and that's okay. And it's glorious, right? But as a person who is a part of a recovery community, I'm not going to define what the recovery community looks like. But I can tell you what my recovery looks like, if that makes sense, right? And I get to define what my recovery looks like to me. And if I don't define what my recovery looks like, then that means that somebody else will. And that's been a part of the problem, because by my silence, other people will define it. And that's why we have to speak up. And that's why it's time that we start to use language, we start to speak up about recovery and why the recovery community has to come together. And we start using words and terms that talk about substance use disorder being a public health crisis and start to really talk about why we need this movement of recovery. So now we're going to kind of get more into framing your mind into your sort of narrative, right? Into your storytelling narrative. And we're kind of dipping our toe into advocacy at this point. So I want you to start to think about, yourself, how you're going to talk about your recovery experience, and whether you're a person in recovery or, connected to recovery in any way. The more that you keep it centered on yourself and the things that are meaningful to you, the not necessarily the easier, but think about where your passions lie, right? The more passionate you are about something, like that's the impact that you're going to land on people, right? So all of the times that I talk about, um, you know, the things that I'm passionate about, for example, like I share about being 23 years old and ending up in a homeless shelter because I was homeless. Um, those are the things that I'm passionate about, is that people shouldn't be 23 years old ending up in a homeless shelter. I should have never have landed at that point in my life, right? I should have been there were several opportunities where my life should have been intervened on, but for some reason or another, I fell through the cracks. So we need to do better, right? And this is another one of those opportunities. So making it personal, it adds credibility and breaks down misperceptions. Talk about your recovery and not your addiction, your recovery story. Again, we're talking about your recovery experience, and we'll talk more about sharing your story of resilience and not your story of trauma. Talk about your recovery community. So if you're connected to like a recovery community organization or a recovery community center or anything like that, talk about your goals and your dreams. So what we don't share, we do not share stories of trauma in public settings. And I love everyone here. I love you all, but we do not share stories of trauma in public settings. So when I say things like I ended up in a homeless shelter at 23, I think you get the sense of where my life was at 23. I don't have to share with you like all of the really graphic details that led me to that homeless shelter, because that isn't a time when I'm sharing with like my neighbors or my family even. I don't need to share with them like all of that trauma, because that could be traumatizing for them, right? Like that could be triggering for them. And for some people who have lost loved ones, that could be really re-traumatizing for them. And we don't want to do that to them either, right? We want to help bring them in, and we want to help them to elevate their message too, right? So how can we do that? We don't want to share those stories of trauma, but we can use our story as a way to share that, or share pieces of our story in a way that is colorful or that illuminates certain characteristics, right? So that's why I talk about like I ended up in a homeless shelter at 23, because that's that's pretty gnarly. And I think about that all the time, as like I'd only had 2 years of the ability to drink legally and yet ended up in a homeless shelter. But things like that, right? Thinking about how you can share your story, even as a one sentence liner. This is how my life ended up, but let me share what I'm doing now, right? And then sharing all of the story of resilience that you have. And so confine your recovery to only one modality and be inclusive and not exclusive. So don't only say that this is the only way, this is how you have to be, and this is it. So thinking about being inclusive, so saying that you are a member of the recovery community. And that's why we, when we kind of get into the I don't want to say elevator pitch, but to your introduction and your storytelling narrative, why we use the language of being a member of the recovery community, or saying that you're a member of being in long-term recovery. And that is because it helps you to be a member of something that's much larger than yourself. It doesn't like make you put yourself into one specific category. Something else that we don't do, we don't argue. It isn't going to be helpful to get into a screaming match or a yelling match with anybody. It's not worth it. It is not worth it to get into a yelling match about what works and what doesn't work. Or what programs are effective or what's not effective. Your job is not to win the heart and mind of everybody. If you feel that way, then my hat's off to you, and I hope that you can do it. But that's not what I think, or I believe personally, and that's not what my organization believes. We are here to plant seeds. We're here to plant seeds of hope, and we're here to plant seeds of like, this is what it could look like, and this is what can be different. But we want to inform, and we don't want to get into heated matches, because that's not going to be helpful for anybody. And also 9 times out of 10, and I literally mean this, and every time that it has happened when somebody has gotten upset or has been disgruntled, even at me, at my organization, and not just at me, it's like PAR, but at me when I was at Young People in Recovery, because I've been in the public setting for a really long time. And there's been a lot of people that have come to me that have been very upset just at like substance use disorder, not at me personally, but at addiction, and has been, what to take their anger out on us. And then 2 years later, they come to me and ask me for resources. It has happened 9 times out of 10. And that's because they know where I am, because I am visible. And I never even like have any sort of attitude with them, and I immediately send them anything that they ask me, because that is what it's about. I don't care about anything else, because that is what it's about, and that's what we need to do. So learn to overcome stigma. So stigma, as we know, is just shame, right? That is all stigma is. It's just shame. And somebody just said, hurt people hurt people. Exactly. And so how do we overcome that? So when we are faced with people who want to argue, who are angry, who are upset, how do we overcome? Using de-escalation techniques, using I statements, using things like I understand, and or I see that right now we may not be able to, have this conversation. Let's revisit. I see you've put a lot of thought in this. I understand, keeping it to yourself, um, trying to keep yourself centered is very important. And sometimes you don't even need to engage if you're not able to keep yourself calm, right? Because at first and foremost, like, you are the one who needs to make sure that you are okay, right? At the end of the day. But if you're not able to sort of keep yourself at a safe space, then don't engage. Just do not engage. So that's up to you. But this is, again, right, like, we're talking about in a public setting and in the general community, and sometimes like emotions can get heightened, and you could be facing people that have been hurt and harmed, and been through a lot of trauma and things, just as much as you have. So it's really important to know that you and your cup is full, and that you are taken care of. So you need to make sure that you're okay before you are to, go out and do that sort of work. Okay, now we're going to get into your personal statements. And you can feel free, if you'd like, to sort of drop in the chat your personal statements. If you'd like, you don't have to. No, you don't have to. No pressure. But if you want. So I'll say mine just as a example, and then we'll kind of go through a few here. So me, Tara, hi, I am a person in long-term recovery, which means to me that I've lived a life of resilience since April of 2011. And that's just, close to 14 years, but I like to brag and say 13, because lucky number 13. And if anybody on here, that there might be a handful of y'all that know that I'm a Taylor Swift fan. So I always talk about lucky number 13, and yeah, so that's fun. Anyway, and so what that has allowed me to become today is, today I get to be a homeowner. And for me, that is amazing, because at one point in my life, I was homeless, and I was homeless at 23 as a college dropout. And today I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 degrees. When I was a college dropout who thought that I would never get to go back to school. And actually, I had a school tell me that they would never let me back in. So for me, that's amazing. And see, like that, I get passionate about that, because also when I started to go back to school, and I was in school for probably about a year, And I realized how important school was to me and how much it gave me and how it was filling my cup. I started to help other people to get back into school. And I guarantee you, I probably helped over 200 people apply for school, figure out how to fill out their financial aid, and, just like go through the process because it was so terrifying. And I hope that those people also helped other people to do it, right? Because that's how we do it. But again, right? Like it's those things. Those things are my passions. And that's what I talk about when I talk about myself. So think about those things that you're passionate about. So I am a person in long-term recovery, which means long-term recovery has given me new hope and stability. I've been able to create a better life for myself, my family, and my community. I'm speaking out so that others have the opportunity to achieve long-term recovery as I have. I am now enrolled in school, something I never thought would be possible. Collegiate recovery communities make that a reality. If you're a part of collegiate recovery communities, or if you're a part of recovery community centers, or any sort of community network, thinking about that. Thank you, Jamie, for that. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Beautiful. 36 years. Woohoo. Awesome. Okay, and now for any family members who may be on, so core message for you guys. I and my family are in long-term recovery, which means it has brought stability to his or her life. We've become healthier together, enjoying family life in our home. Long-term recovery has given me and my family new purpose and hope for the future. I want to make it possible for other people and their families to do the same. And if you're a person in recovery and also have family member, I mean, this is true for you too. Thank you. All right. And then anyone who is a provider, faculty, administrator, or ally or friend, right? Like I said earlier, like people that are allies are just as important. I am an ally to this person who is a part of our program, agency, insert whatever. It has brought stability to his or her life. They are a part of our community that helps empower and enhance our program or community experience. Long-term recovery has given them and our program new purpose, creating a culture of support and assistance, if I could read. Our program makes it possible for all people to find community to enhance the quality of life while pursuing goals and success. One time. Love it. Thank you, Jacob, for sharing. Love it, love it. All right, and we're going to keep rolling. So language of recovery and interacting with the community. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about stakeholders, and we'll talk stakeholders, media, and legislators. So we're going to talk about learning tips for interviews and speaking, techniques with the media, and to be your best and authentic self. So just because we're talking about honing in on your story and speaking more specifics doesn't mean you won't be authentic, or doesn't mean that I'm saying like don't be your authentic self. I'm actually telling you to be more specific about your specific authentic self, and to talk more about your recovery and kind of target different parts of your story. So specifically when we talk about the media, I think it's really important, especially if you're at an organization, if you represent an organization, to think about, if the media contacts you, consider if the interview is right for you. Sometimes the media will contact you and they'll say, hey, we want to interview you because of an article or a news story that we heard because of a place that is doing bad business, and we want a quote from you. Well, does that news article make sense to you? Do you want to be listed next to that? Does that make sense? And I'll tell you, sometimes I've said no. And there's been news stories where I've had to tell the media person that, I'm not going to answer that. Or, or I have answered the question in a way that they didn't like my answer. and they've asked me in another way and I answered the way that I wanted to, and they didn't actually air my interview. And that's because I was controlling the narrative, because I was controlling my recovery story and not a stigmatizing narrative that they wanted to share. And that's okay. Sometimes that's going to be what it is, but you can control that and you should control that. So you want to determine if that's, what the interview is going to look like to you. You can always ask the media, what is this interview about? Can you send me preliminary questions? You can role play the interview and rehearse the hard questions, visualize your audience and speak to them as though they're in the room. I always practice. And then if you are like on a podcast or anything like that, so really good practice, especially if you're on video or anything like that, is like to sit up straight and lean forward. If you're like, that's literally what I'm doing right now on this video. I'm sitting up straight and I'm leaning forward, so that way I'm engaged in this video and in front of a screen or a camera. And that's also true if you're like on a podcast or being recorded on audio. Or something that I do too, even on like the phone, I've done for like radio or a podcast, is like stand up and like walk around if you have good connection, because that will keep you engaged and keep you like active. So that's a good thing to do also. And here we are, recovery language in the media with using that colorful sort of narration. So using colorful language, metaphors or analogies that help make your point and increase the likelihood of being quoted, but also, they protect your story and share it in a way that's meaningful without sharing trauma. So recovery helped me pick up the shattered pieces of my life. Colorful. My life was a freight train going downhill with no brakes. Use personal stories, you and your work, family, or friends to support your points. Avoid jargon or technical language. Just speak as you would with a friend. And so this is really good, especially with like stakeholders, legislators, and more officials, more than necessarily the media, unless you're talking about really specific policies or something. But the use of factoids. But if you don't know the factoids, or if you don't know where you got them, don't use them. So, I mean, I have all of the cited research for this, and I'm happy to provide that if you'd like. But here's a few. So over 23 million Americans are living in long-term recovery. Substance use disorder is a public health crisis. Deaths of young people and adults rise every year. It can take an individual 6 attempts before they are able to sustain long-term recovery post-treatment. Substance use addiction costs the US over $450 billion every year. Disruption to recovery dramatically drops by nearly 80% after 5 years of long-term recovery, proving this is an illness that needs long-term supports in place. So now we will kind of move into advocacy. So this is kind of a great, I did a training yesterday for some of our cohort that's going to be participating in Recovery Advocacy Day tomorrow. So I'm going to use this sort of as a template, not that you should use anything that I'm going to say here, but this is just some examples, I'll say, as of some topics that my organization discusses around recovery and some different themes that we're advocating for, just as like pieces of really great, not even policy measures, just things that are good practices for recovery support services. So some of those things are, sorry, my like bubbles are in the way. So it's identifying our key issues, right? That's something that we've done at my organization, which are value-based payment models, the 10% set aside from our block grant funds that come from the federal government, and peer support workforce. So talking about peer support providers and our certification process. So doing your research. So kind of going back to the conversation earlier. So as you are preparing to build an argument, make sure to use or make sure to identify the specific and current issue. So read over the materials and have notes ready. Conduct your own research if you don't have, access to, any publications, or if you don't, or maybe it's not available, or, substance use disorder treatment is kind of an older sort of industry than recovery supportive services industry. I'm going to say industry, but it's really not an industry. There isn't a lot of research data that is available in the community recovery support services space, just because it's very new, and it hasn't really even been around for that long. It's only been around for like less than 20 years, truly. So it's still very new and innovative. We only have like some white papers and, yeah, just some white papers, truly. But the more that there has been a focus on community-based recovery support services, that gives us more of an opportunity to use that data and use that research to help to elevate that conversation. So conduct your own research and meet with other subject matter experts and become knowledgeable around those multidimensional lenses. So a great sort of example of that multidimensional lens is, like, for example, peer support providers, which you guys probably know this, right? Peer support providers, you guys, there are so many different places where you guys occupy. So you might be within criminal justice settings, right? Like you work within criminal justice settings, but and the way that you operate in those settings would not be the same as within an ER setting, right? Like the things that you talk about, do, facilitate, the interactions that you have with your clients, they're not going to be the same. The same with like harm reduction, right? Like all of those spaces are different, right? So my understanding as somebody who is trying to educate policymakers around peer support in a general sense, I would need to know and understand each of those separate fields more clearly. So I would need to speak with each of those sort of sectors in a different way. So I would need to understand that multidimensional lens, if that makes sense. I hope that kind of helps you to see like how sort of diverse that is. So for example, this is something that we kind of created, again, just as an example, nothing more than that. Just as talking points. This is a really great way for you whenever you're meeting with any official or any person for any reason to have good talking points. So if you're meeting, like having a theme, like value-based payment models, for example, you have just a couple of bullet points. Hey, this is what it is, and then this is why it's important. Boom, boom, boom. Around any of those themes. So make sure and practice your elevator pitch. Anytime that you're meeting with your officials or legislators at the local, state, or federal level, practice your elevator pitch, and they're going to want to know why you're there. I think we're going to get to that point here in just a second. So once you know who you should address your grievance to, right? Like we talked about really specific stuff. We were talking about Recovery Advocacy Day and some of those examples. But if you have something that's totally different for your community, maybe you want to talk about recovery schools in your community and get a recovery school available, right? And once you know who you need to talk to, that's the school board, right? Like you need to meet with your school board. So you know who you need to talk to. So now you need to set up a meeting, and you have all of your research, you have your notes, you have how much it's going to cost and how to start it. You have all of your stuff ready. So now you set the meeting. These are the people that you talk to, right? So this is kind of that next step. So who are we going to meet with? Issue, meetings. So these are some different examples. So meeting with your metro councils, if it's a specific like local issue, metro councils, local school districts, county commissioners, if it's a local issue like zoning, ordinance, or neighborhood, school stuff also, like that's a local issue. If it's a state elected legislator, if it's a statutory issue like criminal justice, public health, primary education, etc. And primary education, so if it's a primary education when it comes to like, that's kind of a double-edged sword because it's both, because it can be local and state for the primary education piece. Because it can be local school board to start one, and it could be primary education at the state level to require a new sort of have a new school requirement, right? Like that's how schools actually that's how schools were required to have mental health first aid. It became a state requirement. I think like 2 or 3 years ago. So that's, another piece. Congressional members, if it's a federal issue like governmental functions. A note, if you cannot meet with your elected official, considering meeting with organizations or agencies centered around that issue. Again, right, like that's like the state boards, your fiscal courts are also a good place. Constables, if it's your county. I know, especially in, Kentucky, I'm thinking about Kentucky. In the rural areas, you're going to meet with your constables or your like Kentucky Association of Counties, because you might have regional sort of work groups rather than metro councils, magistrates. Thank you, Gina. And so, thinking about how each area is made up is going to be different. Always bring business cards. Always, always, always. If you don't have business cards, you can actually get some made up from like Vistaprint. Really pretty cheap, like $20. So I mean, you can get some made up pretty cheap. And even that's just like personal. So you don't have to have anything fancy. And rally and lobby days. So PAR does rally days. So we have the Rally for Recovery, and we have the Recovery Advocacy Day, for example. There's also other organizations that do lobby days, like the ACLU of Kentucky. And then there's dream.org. They do a rally day. They do the Day of Empathy. And there's a ton of other organizations. Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. I think ABLE is doing one today. There's a women's one that's today that's through ABLE, I think. There's a ton of them though. And you could, connect with them and utilize them and partner with them. So attendance at these days is a great opportunity to for you as community members to participate in sort of the legislative process. And legislators do want to hear from you. Like they want to hear from you. They want to learn from you. They want to hear about the things that are meaningful to you. Every legislator, they do kind of have different understanding and a different sort of belief system of, how they legislate. Some believe that they were voted in and as a representative. So their voters believed in them and their voice, so they represent them. And they don't necessarily have to meet with them all the time. So they feel that the legislator's voice is the voice that they represent. And then you have some legislators who will meet with their constituents all the time because they want to make sure that they are always having that voice at the table and are constantly like reaching out to their constituents. So, you have sort of a mixture of both of those different types of leadership. So, but it's always good to sort of know, right? And to make your face present and, to build that relationship. So it's just good to do that anyway, and to build that relationship for you and your organization. And also for, you as a community member, because this is about your community. This is our community. We live here too. So here are a few things. So sign up to attend and participate. Ensure that you have all the material the lead organizer sends out. Sometimes they'll send and they'll say, make sure to show up at this time. If you meet with, your elected official, fill out this paperwork. Let us know what you talk about. Because sometimes like that legislator will say, we're going to vote no, or maybe they'll say, well, we're up to talking about it if the sponsor will change this word or this paragraph or something like that. And that's good information to take back to the other sponsor or what have you. So stuff like that can happen. And know what time to show up and where. If there's a safe place between meetings and events, bring a small snack. Also, bring comfortable shoes, wear comfortable shoes. Those marble floors are not forgiving on the feet. Always bring business cards. Of course, business cards are the name of the day. And if you are participating in an organization's event, remember you are there to support their message, but also to advocate for yourself and your organization. So just because you're there with somebody else doesn't mean that you are not there representing yourself too. And then meeting with officials. So here's speech 101, right? If anybody has ever taken a speech class, and it doesn't even matter if it's a college speech class, it's any speech class, the structure, the rule of three, you always want to give like the repetition of three. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. So that way you will repeat the three main points at least 6 times, no matter what, or at least 9 times, I guess it would be. So you want to tell them what you're going to tell them. So you set the stage. You're going to tell them exactly what you want, and then you're going to tell them by repeating what you just told them. So that's, and you don't have to give them some big long story. You get like 2 minutes. That's why it's so important to have like that elevator pitch down to a science, and know exactly what you're going to say. And that's why I like the example that we went over, and I think I might have it. Yes. Ha. As you can see, all of our main points here have 3 bullet points. But that's why, right? Like, it's just keep it really simple. And we don't have any, huge long paragraphs or anything like that. We just keep it really simple. Again, this is just as an example, not saying anybody should use any of this by any means, but, just as an idea of different ways that you can share about your themes. Just as an example, I'll say like the 10% set aside, which is a pretty, I feel like everybody would be supportive of that. But what we are asking is that the state support a 10% set aside for recovery support services from the block grant funds that come from the federal government. So the federal government sends every state block grant dollars, and we are asking our state legislators to set aside 10% specific for recovery support services that are provided through community-based organizations. So that would be like recovery community centers. So we are ensuring that stable funding is for recovery programs. Boom. Supports the non-clinical community-based services. Boom. Reduces reliance on philanthropy and short-term grants. Boom. Short, simple, sweet. Although I stumbled through that philanthropy word. It's probably because I've been talking too much today. But nonetheless, right? Simple, short, sweet, done. All right. So I see somebody. Thank you. Thank you for participating, Jamie. Love it, love it, love it. Leave behinds and goals. So those were the bullet points, right? Those are the things that we are looking at, like sort of as the participants who are in the room and participating. But you will be giving things as somebody who is meeting with your officials and legislators. Like, you always want to bring those research articles or those white papers, all of the things that you had, the research that you conducted and that you want to build your argument from. You want to take that with you. You want to print it out and bring it with you and give that to the official about why you want to build this thing. For example, we talked about the recovery schools earlier, right? So if you're meeting with the school board, right, you want to maybe reference some recovery schools that are in Texas, or the really amazing ones that are in Massachusetts. They have like 13 or 14 of them that are incredible. So, you can bring some different examples of them. And you can, talk about how much they cost annually, or how, the impact that they have on the local community, how, supportive they've been for students, and, the resilience factors for the student body, or, whatever, sort of data that you'd like to share. But those sort of things, right? And you want to keep those in like a folder or something, and you want to hold on to them until after the meeting. So you'll have your notes, you'll have your little note card, right? And then you'll have your folder, and you will talk to your legislator or your school board person, and you will talk to them about, these are the things that are important to me. Here's why they're important. Because, as I'll say for me, because I was 23 years old, and there were so many times that my life could have been intervened on, and we could have done this or that, and my life could have been changed if I had this opportunity. And now I've recognized that there are a lot of different programs and opportunities that we could have had. And I've found some really great programs from different areas of the country, and now I want to bring them to Kentucky. And so I'd like to leave you with these documents, or these resources, and I'd like to talk about how we can build them here. And then I can give, once the meeting's over, I would give them my folder and say, let's set up a follow-up meeting after you've had time to review, all the research and all the things. That way they're not sitting there looking at all of your stuff while you're giving your pitch. So that's just a little pro tip. But always practice, practice. That's the best tip that I could give. And when I first started using recovery language, even like in a community setting, even before advocacy and really talking with legislators or stakeholders or anything like that, or the media, I was walking around my apartment, and I was going to Jefferson, and it was my I just watched, I don't know if you guys have seen this film, The Anonymous People. It's amazing if you haven't seen it. I just watched The Anonymous People film, and I was like, this is amazing. I need to learn this, and I need to figure out how I'm going to practice this as much as possible, because I wanted to make sure that I presented myself in a way that showcased that people in recovery were so much more than just an addict. Because at that time, in 2012, that's how I was characterized. With that, I was just. And so now, and I look back now, and I see all of the amazing faces, and I can't tell you how excited I am for tomorrow, because I get to see so many amazing faces, and I get so emotional, because in 2012, that would have never have been possible, because it was just. But tomorrow, I get to see 500 smiling faces at our nation, at our capital, at our state's capital, and I'm so excited for that. And that's because of this, and that's because of this incredible language, and we get to show up, and we get to be present. So I'm very excited for anybody who is interested in wanting to just be present, share your message of recovery, and participate in the process as peers and as people. And so now we will kind of move into the question and comment portion of this training part. And I think I did see one person with their hand up for sure. I don't know do you want me to unshare, Brooke, or?
Yeah, you could unshare for now. And if
Okay.
you have to pull up a slide to reference, you can just reshare. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you, Tara. That was so awesome. And if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, box. Looks like there's a question in the chat.
Let's see. The NAR question, is that what, can I get more information on that? The Cassie, is that the for NAR? I can get you connected to The open calls, I think, just restarted for it's KIR, Kentucky Alliance for Recovery Residences. They just restarted. So I can definitely hook you up with that. They just relaunched now because we just hired a new executive director. I'm happy to say. So it's exciting.
So Tara, for tomorrow for Recovery Advocacy Day, like what's your like number one like objective for tomorrow? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Let's see.
And I'll grab this email out of the chat for you later. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My number one objective for tomorrow is just for us to show up, have a purple recovery thriving event, truly, and to celebrate recovery. Really, that's all I want. We don't really, I mean, we're there to celebrate recovery and to show up and to show that recovery is thriving in Kentucky and that our voice matters and that we matter. Our voice matters and that we are a community. So to have people show up is beautiful. Beautiful. So if y'all show up, that's it. That's all I want. So if you do that, you're there.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we have a hand up. Michael, let's see if I can unmute. Okay. Go ahead, Michael. You should be able to unmute and ask your question.
I was just wanting to ask if I could get some information on the NAR or the KIR or whatever they've changed the name to as well.
Yes. I can probably actually get his email real quick. Is that okay if I do that real fast?
I can get it for you actually and put it in the chat if you want.
Okay, great.
The other question.
Thank you.
I did see somebody ask about the research. I am happy to provide any research for anything. I don't remember who it was though, and I don't remember what research they were asking for. If they want, okay, I'd love to see the research. Whitney Wynn, I think if I said that name right or wrong, I'm so sorry. If you want to drop your, oh, look, Dan, thank you. If you would like to send me or drop your email, I'd be happy to connect with you and share anything and everything you'd like. I assume it was maybe about some of the examples that I was using for the Recovery Advocacy Day, which will have a ton of research stuff there tomorrow if you are interested in learning more about that stuff too. So. Yes. Thank you so much, Jamie. She said, I believe the news is so focused on the negative that we have to do everything we can to shine a light on those who are finding their way and become leaders in the recovery community, treatment facilities, and beyond. I see it every day and I'm hopeful for the future. Thank you so much, Jamie.
I'm going to add to the chat one more time the link for the continuing education certificate and also the link for your survey, Tara. So that's going in the chat one more time for anybody who's still listening.
Absolutely.
So I just heard so much. I was taking notes. I loved it. Loved the directive to, when you're talking about your recovery story, to focus on resilience and not the trauma dump. I feel like I hear lots of trauma dumps, and I love that, the leaning toward the optimism, the health, the wellness, resilience, and always framing it as a public health crisis, not a moral failing. That's so important. And all the advocacy tips, I really heard just be prepared, like overall, be prepared, know your research, and then know it from all sides. That multi-dimensional piece you were explaining. Know how to introduce yourself, know how to introduce your work, have your materials ready to hand out. Like, so much great stuff. Have any other more questions come
I
through the
did see
chat?
one that was really good. Amanda dropped in the chat. Do you have any advice for people who are concerned about the recent news related to the federal funding freezes? And I really would like to answer that one, because I think that is such a timely question. And I would like to make sure that everybody kind of does sort of take a minute and we pause, right? Right now in our country, we are in the middle of a transition, right? Like this, every time that we have a new executive branch, like this is going to happen. It just happens that it is such a dramatic shift in different types of leadership that we're kind of swinging pendulums. So we were like on this side earlier last year, and now we're moving to this side. And because this executive branch is shifting, we're seeing such a big swing. And I think that that's what we're seeing. And we're going to continue to sort of see this shift over the next couple of weeks. And so I think it's still going to kind of be unsettling. But I think, and I know that if we be patient, everything is going to kind of settle, and we'll kind of know our path and the steps forward, and we can sort of build a strategy for the next 4 years in the coming weeks. But one thing that we do not need to do is panic. That is one thing that we do not need to do. And definitely what I can tell everyone in the recovery community is some of the things that we really need to lean into is thinking about some of the spaces that we really need to think about for building our strategy out, right? So for us as individuals in recovery, and that work in like recovery community spaces, we need to think about leaning into workforce development and re-entry, getting people back to work, getting into school, getting into trades, like helping them to on that path of upward mobility, right? Like, how can we lean into that, build our data and storytelling narrative around that, and help to not sell that, but build that narrative around that and showcase that, right? Because that's what's going to marinate with decision makers and with, harm reduction and harm reduction, I'll say. I've been sharing, with them, like really leaning into prevention, because what they're doing, a lot of that work is preventing, the spreading of disease, the spreading of illness, death. They are preventing death. So leaning into that, what can we do to help build out that narrative? And what I've been sharing with folks who are working with young people and adolescents, really leaning into prevention with them as well, right? Like, how can we get them into schools and helping them to engage with youth in a different way, in a different sort of meaningful way, right? Like really leaning into some different alternative methods, because I think that that's kind of where our strategy is going to be building the next couple of years. And so, I would suggest, as we are kind of, rolling in the next couple of weeks, as we're patiently waiting for the transition to settle, because I still suspect remember, we're in the pendulum, right? We were on this side, we swung this way because the transition is taking place, and now we're kind of waiting for that dust to settle. So it'll settle somewhere over here at some point. And once it settles, we'll kind of know where everything is. And then we'll build a strategy around how are we going to, continue to build out our space and continue to make sure that folks receive the services that they need. And that's how we're going to build that narrative around how we can get people the help that they need. So think about that. And I'm here to help. I'm a data nerd, so I'm happy to help build that narrative and share that story with you if you need me. And so happy to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. Like, and that just listening to you speak about tangible strategic momentum is just really helpful, because I feel like I myself and I'm encountering others that are just kind of frozen with like apathy and feeling like, oh, there's no hope. There's no there's nothing to be done and like that powerless feeling. So hearing you talk about real strategy and that not all hope is lost, far from it, is really like just uplifting to hear for me personally. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you all, and y'all are amazing. And I can't wait to see y'all tomorrow.
Yay. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining the Kentucky Harm Reduction and Recovery Community of Practice, this webinar series. Again, complete the surveys, please, so we can evaluate this whole deal. And thank you again, Tara. Really appreciate your time and your work. And I hope it's a great day tomorrow.